Hey, what's up everybody, this is Muse24, and today I'm going to be taking a look at another Halo novel. This is Halo Cryptum, and this is the start of the Forerunner saga. And I had read a few Halo novels before this one, but this was one that I was really excited to pick up because it deals with the Forerunners directly. It's not just referencing them like the games do, it's not just picking up pieces left behind by their culture, it's showing them when they were still alive and when they were the dominant force in the galaxy. And I thought that was a really cool, different angle for the Halo storyline to go into. Now, I will say that this is actually pretty important to read going into Halo 4, and I assume the rest of the Halo Reclaimer Trilogy, as it's being called. I'm surprised at how much content there was in Halo 4 that was direct reference to this novel, because a lot of times with the other Halo games, they'd make novels that tie into them, but not super important. Like, there's connections between Halo Reach and Ghosts of Onyx because all of the characters that you play as in, or all your team members in Halo Reach in the campaign are Spartan 3s, and the Spartan 3 program is dealt with in Ghosts of Onyx. But beyond that, there's usually just very loose connections, kind of bridging the gaps between the games, nothing super important. Whereas here, there are major characters that play significant roles, at least in the events of Halo 4, and like I said, I would assume in the later games. I will say that I played through Halo 4, and I didn't like it that much, truth be told. I felt like the multiplayer was too much Call of Duty stuff, which I don't play that many shooters to begin with, and I enjoyed Halo because it was different. But that said, this is about the book, not the game. So this is both set up for Halo 4 in terms of the connections to the Prometheans and all that, but also set up for the grand Halo storyline. Because in all the Halo games, they reference the Forerunners as the creators of the Halo rings, and the Covenant obviously see them as gods, as someone, greater, some greater beings than them that want to have them initiate this great journey after they all disappeared. So Cryptum actually opens on Earth, and it's a very different Earth than we know. It's sort of like the Forerunners, primarily the Librarian, who's referenced a bunch of times in Halo 3, has sort of gathered all these life forms from around the galaxy and put them on Earth as this big, zoo of a planet. And there's creatures there that we don't have in our own time, like krakens and stuff, that exist with these subspecies of humans. And basically what happened was, 100,000 years before the start of the Halo series, the humans had an interstellar empire, and they went to war with the Forerunners because they just kept expanding and became too greedy for their own good, and the Forerunners just kicked the crap out of them. And so they, as a means to control the human population, basically broke them down into, I believe, 12 or 13 different subspecies, and then placed them on Earth. So you have these groups of humans that are kind of related to each other, but also differentiate themselves from one another. And the two most important ones are Chakas and Riser, and they end up coming across a casket of sort that actually houses the Didact. And the Didact was the greatest warrior of his time during the war with the Forerunners and the humans. And basically once the wartime ended, he didn't agree with how things were going to be progressing with the development of the Halo rings and the preparations for the flood infestation that was coming in from outside of the galaxy. And so he just sealed himself away for some 10,000 years afterwards. So the Didact is actually married to the Librarian, and it's interesting because she's the one who had the foresight to, push for the Halo rings to be developed and push to have the humans all put on Earth and sort of have this this portal to the Ark placed on Earth as we see in Halo 3. And it's very interesting that, she and the Didact are in a relationship with one another, but they don't necessarily agree with the methods that either one is taking to the threat of the Flood and the humans. So Chakas and Riser end up going with the Didact back to the home territory of the Forerunners. Not exactly their home world, but the space that they call home, and where all their systems are set up and the different planets that they have platforms and stations on. And so he travels with them, and they meet another Forerunner named Bornstellar. And Bornstellar is kind of this rebel, younger Forerunner who doesn't want to take on the duties he's been given, and the Didact realizes that there's a good chance he's not going to make it out of this in one piece. So he ends up performing this process where basically he can carry over most of his memories to another Forerunner. And the Forerunners have always been described as like somewhat human, having human appearance or something similar to that, and having a very human like culture, but it's also far more advanced and sort of ethereal and greater than what we could ever achieve. And so they have this ability to like transfer their own memories over to someone else and also raise them to a different status of being, because they have different like cultural levels of how they exist and different like, I guess you would say, titles for each rank of their species. So he basically brings him up to be the same level as himself, as another Didact. And so we have the Didact being the original Didact, and the Born Stellar Didact. And eventually they run into characters like the Master Builder, who is sort of a ruthless, not necessarily a bad guy, but he doesn't agree with what the Didact's been doing or what the Didact intends to do, and he becomes a pretty big hurdle for them to get over. We also see some of the Flood. They come into play much later in the story, and the rogue AI, Mendicant Bias, who is mentioned in Halo 3 as having betrayed the Forerunners, we do see him, or it rather, come into the forefront there a little bit at the end, and we also see what the Halo rings are actually capable of once they've been built. Now, they don't fire them like they do in the Halo games, but we see them used for different tactical purposes, as fighting off ships and all that. And we also learned that there were actually 12 Halo rings originally built, and that 5 of them, I believe, were destroyed when they were taken over by Mendicant Bias and his forces that he turned on the Forerunners, because he was corrupted by the Flood. So there's a lot going on in this book, but it's also very focused on setting the stage for the Forerunner Trilogy. And I think it does a really good job at being science fiction that doesn't feel like your typical science fiction. It's very much a Halo novel that breaks all the conventions of the Halo story. And I really like it because of that. It very much feels more like old science fiction, like Bradbury and Asimov-type early stuff, where it's more about exploring the culture and the way of life that these Forerunners have, and how things are in this very old but yet very advanced society. And it's really cool to see the Forerunners firsthand, how they behave, how they talk to each other, how they view the other species of the galaxy, because they are sort of masters of this stellar empire. They're not as aggressive as the humans are in their expansion, but they are very much in control of everything, and they very much know that. They also have someone that they look up to as well, because the Foreigners in the Halo series, from both the perspective of the Covenant forces and the humans, are looked upon as, the most advanced species of their time, and they left behind tons of clues and tons of tech that is adopted by both the humans and the Covenant forces. The Foreigners have a species like that as well, named the Precursors, and the Precursors, there's kind of debate as to whether they were, ever really a thing. There's only a few relics left behind by the Precursors, but the Didact is very much firm in his belief that the Precursors were what let the Forerunners exist in the first place. He views them, and I think some of the other characters as well, view them as like gods, and that they allowed the Forerunners and other species to prosper in the galaxy. So it's really interesting to see how, the species that becomes renowned for how much of an impact they have on the galaxy also believes that there's something bigger out there than they are. And it sort of like perpetuates the question of, okay, how far back does this thing go? But I highly recommend this novel. It's really good, even if you're not into the Halo series. It's just a really interesting read. Greg Bear does great at creating this unique culture and having some really unique dialogue for the characters. It's also a very curious book in the sense that it tells you a lot about the Foreigners, and it also keeps a lot of things secret. It doesn't tell you what they look like specifically. It'll just say, oh, they made a facial expression like this, or they made a gesture like this, but it does not tell you specifically what the Forerunners look like. So it still keeps that sort of a mystery in building up to the Reclaimer trilogy, because this book came out before Halo 4 was out. And it does set the stage nicely, I think, for the second book. I have not read the third book yet, but I have read the second one, and I will do a review of that at some point in the future. But that's pretty much it for this review, and with that, I will see you guys next time.